Shippers return to their old ways of detention as carrier compliance increases. For our radio recap, guests discussed actionable data on Show 4. The Bureau of Labor Statistics cites lack of pay, not drivers, as cause for the driver shortage. The ATA responded by saying that the government driver shortage study got it wrong. Soft covenant transport guidance sparks a sell-off in the truckload stocks. FedEx earnings depressed by slowing global economy and trade fears. I'm JP.
And I'm Chad.
And we discuss all these issues and more on this week's episode of What the Truck.
Redwood Logistics is one of the nation's fastest growing logistics providers, fueled by industry-leading technology and a passionate team of experts. From multimodal brokerage and dedicated truckload to third-party logistics and TMS consulting, implementation, and integration, Redwood Logistics delivers next-generation solutions for its clients and much more than a truckload. You're already having such a great time, aren't you, JP? We are also visited by Ellis Smith. You know what? It didn't take 59 more episodes. Only the very next one. Did such an outstanding job last time. Great to have you on, man.
Hey, great to be back. Thanks for having me.
The award-winning.
Yeah, that's kind of what tripped me up. I was trying to decide where to insert that phrase into my normal.
I'd say 3 or 4 times throughout the podcast, you just remind people, you say...
3 or 4 times in our award-winning podcast?
In your award-winning podcast, you should just remind people that this podcast is, in fact, award-winning.
We did win an award.
An award, a significant award, as I understand it. I mean, basically, it was one of the top awards that you can get for podcasts, from what I understand.
It's basically the Pulitzer of freight podcasts.
Yes.
And I forget the name of it.
Stay tuned. Stay tuned for the name of that award at the end of the show.
It was so important that we don't remember the name of it, but we did win an award.
And there's a plaque for that?
Probably somewhere.
Probably
we can work something out.
Yep.
And we want to pause and say thank you to our sponsor, Redwood Logistics.
Thanks, Redwood.
And now we're back. One of the things that we are trying to bring to you each and every week is the weekly market playbook. One of the things that we are seeing, per the headline, is shippers returning to their old ways of detention as carrier compliance increases. So, guys, what do we make about this? Zach Strickland, who wrote the report, is saying you can't blame the shippers if you're in a position of control. Like, let's not blame them. I mean, anybody
So we're
would
saying
do
it's
the
human
same.
nature, you know? I mean, you're in the driver's seat. You've got the carriers wrapped around your little finger, lining up for freight. Why not have them wait out there at the dock for 6 or 7 hours? Why not tell them the bathrooms are for employees only? I mean, is that his point?
No, I think he was saying...
Yeah, to some extent.
No, I think he was saying, like, you can't blame them for feeling, for feeling like the pressure's been taken off of them. You don't hear about shipper of choice anymore because the market's flipped.
Unless you're talking about the Shipper of Choice Award that will be announced at Transparency.
Right. Yeah, I mean...
Well, no, we still think it's important to highlight, like, shippers who, respect drivers' time and try to improve, and make their operations more efficient. But, I mean, the fact of the matter is it's trucks that are looking for freight, not shippers that are looking for trucks. And they know this. And so as, the rate of tender rejections has fallen, as carriers have complied with their contracts or picking up freight because they know they have fewer options, the shippers have relaxed their operations, and we've seen average wait times spike across the country.
And he also points out that there isn't a lot of visibility. We know that 90% of all the trucks on the road are of carriers of 20 or fewer trucks. And he points out, Strickland says that rates are a function, and this is where he tries to break it down. Rates are a function of capacity and costs. And so if there's no visibility or control of any significant share of national capacity, then on the supply side of the equation, carriers can't manage rates consistently, unless there are significant changes on the demand side where, the shippers need more capacity than is available.
Right.
So, I mean, there is a bit of a pendulum swing.
Yeah, it's definitely happened, and you can really see it. It's these two numbers, OTRI, outbound tender rejection index, and weight, average wait times, are moving, are rapidly diverging from each other. As one goes down, the other one is going up. We should say that the way that, and the thing about wait times, we probably have like less visibility than we would even like into that. We don't have specific shippers that we can call out. We don't have specific shippers that we can praise. What our data science team has done is geofence about 200,000 shipper locations in the United States. And when GPSs on trucks go in and out of those, we can see how long it takes them to get in and out of a yard, and that's what we're basing our wait times on.
Now, there was a report by, I believe it was the owner-operators that did name names. And some of those names, I don't know if we want to do that necessarily, but you can certainly see that report, and it was based on survey data. Right. And so, I mean, probably it's the ones that people expect that are causing folks to wait longer. But what's interesting to me is, if you're at a concert and you want to go use the restroom and there's 10,000 people trying to use the restroom, you got a long line. But what we have in freight is we actually have less freight moving. We have less.
Right.
We have less stuff. The volume is near a low. I think it rebounded ever so slightly.
It's down year over year.
And yet we still have this waiting time issue that's getting worse. So it's weird how that works. Normally, a line or a wait is a function of a demand for that.
Whereas actual throughput.
Correct. Where in this case, we probably have fewer trucks doing fewer loads at fewer distribution centers, and yet you have this wait time going up.
Yeah, and I think it's just who has the leverage right now, and right now it's the shippers. But I think it's our job, kind of as business media, to call attention to this trend, to point out how destructive it is. It's from our perspective, wait time is not something like spot rates, right? Where spot rates, it's a zero-sum game, right? If they go down, the carriers lose, but the shippers win. In theory, consumer prices, aren't under pressure, things like that. There's a winner and a loser. With wait times,
everybody loses.
Everyone loses. It's simply more inefficient. It drives up costs for carriers. It pulls capacity out of the market. It lets
drivers don't get paid for long periods of time while they're sitting there doing a job.
Yeah, yards get clogged with trucks. Shippers have to deal with a lot of frustrated people who are trying to move their goods. Relationships get frayed, and I think our kind of role in this is to point to the trend, to talk about what's happening, and to kind of say to the industry, look, do we really want to get into another one of these cycles where it's just okay, now it's my turn to punch you in the face. Okay, next year it's going to be your turn to punch me in the face. Or do we want to kind of establish this shared reality, point out exactly what's going on in a data-driven way, and let people, incentivize people to build actual productive, collaborative relationships.
Well said. I almost feel like I've been to church now. That was a nice little sermon.
I'm inspired.
No, but really, of course, that is what we're all trying to do. Visibility, transparency. Yes, we want solutions to these things. But you're right. We're calling it like we see it. That is something that's happening right now. If anybody has any ideas, please email the show. And
email the show.
Is that just the show at FreightWaves.com, or what's
the award-winning podcast?
The award-winning podcast at FreightWaves.com. We'll set that up.
Dude, so tell me about how the radio show went last Saturday.
The radio show went great last Saturday. We had some really interesting guests. We talked with Chris Henry of TCA. We had a kind of a actionable data theme in some ways. It was fun. I talked to Martin Liu.
It's the best kind of data.
Of data that you can do something with and about, right? Because as we all know, there is so much data out there. It's hard to know what to do with it all. Anyway, but I was thinking towards what is about to happen. Radio show number 5 coming right up on Saturday from 3 to 5. on Road Dog Trucking Sirius XM, Channel 146. We are going to be talking with Todd Tranuski of FTR. We're going to be talking with
He's a smart dude.
Addison Armstrong,
Ooh,
our very own, on about
Yes.
freight futures.
smart guy. I'll definitely listen to that.
We will we'll be talking with Greg Fury of Scopelitis, talking about one of the our big deal, little deals about that California Supreme Court ruling.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah, and I'll be talking with Kevin Hill of Carrier List.
Nice.
Yeah, so
Cool.
it'll be a great episode, and looking forward to everyone tuning in and listening.
Yeah,
And
that sounds like an awesome lineup. A lot of smart people.
It'll be a party. So let's talk about some of the headlines of the week, guys. This is interesting stuff to me. First of all, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the BLS, cites what OIDA has been saying for a long time in this study, that basically if you pay the drivers more, you won't have this driver shortage.
Wow.
And
What an interesting idea.
they undermined this. I know, right? The ATA, I think it's since been about 2005. They've really been, and maybe it's been for decades, but I know since 2005 they've been tracking how they're calling it this driver shortage.
Right.
And so BLS is said
It's kind of interesting that the Bureau of Labor Statistics weighed in on this debate, which is almost
it is interesting.
It's almost like a political debate in some ways between various lobbying groups. I mean, it is their job to describe reality, right, so that Congress can make informed decisions. But it's sort of interesting that they took a side. I mean, I don't think anyone was surprised, or at least not anyone at FreightWaves.
I mean, the lack of pay is so obvious. I mean, if you're Walmart and you're willing to pay your drivers $90,000 a year, you're probably saying, what driver shortage, right? I mean, there's people climbing over one another. I had a discussion with a gentleman the other day who said, no, it's not pay. It's we just need to have an algorithm for identifying the right. And I said, okay, fine, algorithm, whatever. If you paid the drivers $1 million a year to come work for you, what do you think the role for the algorithm would be in that? And he said, yeah, okay, fine. Yeah. I mean, obviously, there's an amount that if you pay a driver or offer to pay a driver, you will have more than enough volunteers to do that work in perpetuity. However, there are some barriers to entry, such as we were discussing a day or two ago. You can drive a truck all around Tennessee, on every highway in Tennessee, and be 18, 19, 20. But unless you have reached the magical age of 21, you cannot go over the border from Tennessee to Georgia driving a truck.
Right.
This is
that's
a silly rule that does, in fact, reduce the available pool of drivers, and it does cause an issue where if I'm 18 and I'm graduating from high school and I'm looking at a career option, and maybe I didn't graduate from high school, but I'm looking at things and I start down a career path, and it's not until 21 that I can actually become a driver.
You probably already have tried to do something else.
Right. I'm already in manufacturing, or maybe I've started a family by then, and now I'm not looking at being a truck driver as an option because I've already started down a path. If it was available to high school graduates or non-graduates at the age of 18 to become a driver, I think you would see a larger proportion of them choose to take that option.
And I do kind of agree with that point because, it's pretty indisputable that the average age of the driver is, getting higher, right? So it's like 52-ish. So, that you want to reduce barriers for young people to enter the industry. But I mean, when we talk about overcapacity,
we don't need any drivers right now. Clearly, I mean, we're fine. Well,
Right.
you've also pointed out, JP, that to new people coming in, they call it a driver shortage, but there's never any stuff left on the dock that's not getting taken. By one point of view, it's like
when's the last time there was a food shortage in Kroger?
Right, the goods do go through.
That's not hurricane related, or there's some other barrier, like a physical tree blocking the road or flooding.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. So,
but let's deal. Here is a fact, and it's what do we want to do with this fact? There is high turnover. There is high turnover, especially for truckload carriers.
Yes.
As the TL carrier. So this is a fact. Now,
And they spend a lot of money trying to replace that turnover. It's a high cost expense item for them.
I think what we have to do is why. You know, the ATA has their perspective, and this BLS study has its perspective. Why is there so much turnover?
Grass is always greener on the other side.
Yeah.
Is it just money? Is it still just the money thing?
It's money, it's respect, it's quality of equipment.
Getting home.
There's lots of different reasons why you would leave one carrier to go work at another carrier across the street. It happens even in like specialized segments of the industry, like oil field services. Like they have crazy turnover because like it's very easy to, once you have a couple of years of experience, if you have like an adequate safety record, to get a job driving for pretty much anybody. And I think the newest people get the least desirable jobs. And so as long as that happens, and that makes sense. I mean, obviously.
Right.
But, if you start off working for Swift, you go through your 4 weeks of training, then you're an apprentice driver, then they throw you over the road for a couple of years. Like, that isn't very fun, and you're not getting paid that much. But if you make it through those 2 years, you can get a job with pretty much anybody. And that's just the way it works.
And it does seem to be that, competitive, specialized workforce.
I will say that I had a conversation with the president of logistics, actually, so the asset light side, but Collins White, president of logistics at Alabama Motor Express. This is a trucking company that was started by his father. He's been in the business his whole life, and he was talking about how they've been able to really improve their retention. And it was a combination of things. It was wages, it was
culture,
changing the way people got home. It was using technology to improve communication between drivers. They use Workhound, which allows drivers to kind of anonymously or not, like basically a driver can complain anonymously about issues. It'll go up the channel. They can have a problem, and then at a certain point, if the company is like, we can resolve this, we just need a little bit more information, they can choose to unanonymize it, things like that. But it makes people speak a lot more freely. It lets people feel like they have a voice, that they won't be punished for expressing their opinions about their working conditions. Collins White said that that's also been a big part of it. Yeah,
that's very interesting. When we really do try to tackle this subject, you have to hit all of the points of, all of the. Yeah. It's just simply got to be a combination.
It's a holistic thing. It's not.
But it does boil down. The most cited thing on all of the surveys is pay, total compensation,
and that's every job.
Look. But not every job, I guess, has the high turnover.
Take fast food. Fast food has 100% plus turnover every year. They're also paid very little. Now, if you were getting paid $100,000 a year to do French fries, you might think about, you say, well, wait a second.
Sticking with it.
Yeah, I might stick with it a little bit more. Pay does have a lot to do with it.
But not everything.
Not everything, because I think you mentioned turnover, and I think we have to draw a distinction between driver shortage, put that in quotes, and then driver turnover. So if there might be a perceived, I don't want to make light of that. It's hard to get drivers. Yes, when you're constantly losing drivers to other companies and you're having to fight over these guys, I understand that there's a perceived driver shortage there. But to JP's point, not everybody's experiencing that same level of turnover. Is that fair to say?
And yes, that is true. Not everyone experiences the same level of turnover. It's limited to the enterprise over-the-road carriers,
right?
Or at least they bear the brunt of it. The other critique I have of the ATA driver shortage meme is that when you look at the way that they measure the driver shortage in raw number of drivers, like 75,000.
Right.
Next year it's going to go up to 85,000. Next year it's going to go up to 100,000. Then 120,000.
I do like that you call it a meme. I want to highlight that.
Yeah. It's a mind virus. But it's never, like, the driver shortage is never in reference to freight demand. How can you have a shortage of capacity without referring to how much capacity is actually needed?
Yeah.
And it looks, if you look at their charts projecting forward the driver shortage, it's an exponential curve upward.
Right.
It's like that's not the way the economic growth in this country looks like. It's
Right.
not,
Interesting deductive reasoning.
Unless
there.
they drive smaller and smaller trucks each year to move the same amount of freight.
I mean, some
then-
of it has to do with like projected like retirement ages and things like that.
I'm sure they would have some responses.
But the methodology is opaque.
That is well said, I think. Their response to the BLS study was they were pointing out that, unlike, and this is similar to what we've just touched on, but to their defense, they said, unlike other blue-collar jobs, motor carriers cannot simply hire anyone to do the job. There are many barriers to entry. There's age requirements, CDL testing standards, strict drug and alcohol testing, and maintaining a clean, safe driving record.
And I think we're in favor of all the safety and everything. I think what I question is the age requirements. You can drive a Humvee around in a war zone, getting shot at and shooting at other people, but you can't drive a truck across state lines. But you can drive it through populated areas and neighborhoods and past schools, as long as you stay in the same state.
Right.
But no, not on a highway, by God.
That's a good argument.
come on.
I'm curious what the bills and the legislation that are up for that will do this year. But it's interesting. I was at the TCA. I was on a panel on driver retention and turnover, and I was seeing all kinds of data. I think it was Driver IQ had some surveys. And they were saying, they looked at veterans and they looked at women in trucking because those are two other initiatives besides the age.
Speaking of war zones.
Yeah, and apparently it does cost a lot more money for a carrier to specifically target these groups. Like with veterans, you have to deal with all kinds of government stuff suddenly, whereas you're used to private enterprises.
Right.
And so you have to hire those people who can speak in the government language and can target the places where those veterans are. And apparently it's similar with trying to find the women demographic that only represents still about 6 to 7% of the total trucker population.
That's really interesting. I mean, and again, going on with the military theme, what you just said about how, trucking is a tough lifestyle, barriers to entry, safety records, drug and alcohol testing, yada, yada, yada. Well, think about how many barriers to entry there are to join the military. And yet hundreds of thousands of people do it every year.
And it pays less than trucking in many cases.
And the lifestyle is far worse.
Yep. Yeah, somebody's screaming at you. You're having to do push-ups for a long time. Then you go over to a place with no air conditioning.
Well,
and bullets flying.
But, talk about not being home, except once a week, once every 2 weeks.
How about an 18-month tour of duty?
Yeah, and so, but what they do is they offer benefits. They offer a way to toward a path toward promotion. They teach you skills that are transferable to other industries. They say, hey, you spend 4 years in the Army, we'll pay for your college. I mean, there are ways that you can get people to, make sacrifices.
Yeah. And so you're suggesting that this is what some enterprise carriers might want to be thinking about.
Yeah. It's like, maybe a company ideally doesn't want to just hire someone for 4 years, but if you're looking at 110% turnover in your industry, what if you say, hey, work for us for 5 years? We'll send you to whatever,
get your certification
welding
at
school or whatever.
community college.
Yeah, that's kind of the opposite of the bonuses, which many find as a necessary evil. We're solving at least the logistics world problems.
Fix the driver shortage next.
Okay.
Next problem.
Problem solved. Nice, JP. Good stuff.
Well
there.
done.
Hey,
That's
what
why
about
this
article that
podcast
you
is
wrote?
award-winning. I just want to point out it's insights like that.
We have an award.
What about this soft covenant guidance sparking a truckload sell-off that you wrote about, JP? Why is the sky falling now?
It was really interesting. I mean, the asset-based truckload carriers started off the year telling their investors that they were going to get all these rate increases, that the economy was basically going to be the same this year as it was last year. And, basically they were still projecting like year-over-year growth, and none of those things turned out to be true, of course.
Whoops.
And Covenant Transport, Chattanooga's own Covenant Transport, CVTI, was the first carrier really to update, to give a first quarter update and say, okay, guys, we're bringing our guidance down. We're going to miss
substantially. I think that it was by a third to 2/3 of what analysts had expected they were going to get.
And I found interesting that we're talking lots of global slowdown. We're talking trade war comes, but I found that notable was that they didn't blame the macroeconomic backdrop. You said
no, I know that was what was fascinating to me too. They blamed
weather.
They blamed weather.
They actually did.
They blamed tariff dislocate the hangover from tariff pull forward in the fourth quarter,
right?
And
which I buy.
They also blamed the government shutdown, which
I don't know.
But what's I always think about like why, okay, so the excuses that an officer of a publicly traded company has for underperformance,
headwinds is normally number one on the list.
Yeah, it's usually it has something to do with the wind,
weather,
but it's like why what purpose does it serve for him to use these excuses rather than and so it's like. If you're trying to protect the value of your stock and the value of your, investor's position, in theory, your own position, right? You want to say, hey, this is just a one-time aberration. Everything's cool. We'll get back on track in the second quarter.
Well, tariffs were one time. The weather's one time. The government shutdown theoretically is one time, right? So those are things where you can say, hey, but brighter times are ahead.
Right. And so if you're trying to limit the sell-off, or if you say, hey, the economy's going to shit and we don't know when things are going to like start growing again.
Or even worse, we've seen people say it was our own operational inefficiencies. We screwed up. We pooped the bed, I guess, to use a PG version of a phrase. And
this is an irreverent podcast. So.
All right, so I could say shit the bed?
Yeah.
Okay, we shit the bed and
really
we've learned our lesson and we won't do it again.
I thought a couple of I don't know where we're going in this direction, but they could have said.
I'm just saying that, like, what you don't want to say is there are massive macroeconomic structural forces working against our company. Like we're probably not going to be a good investment for the next couple of years.
We
like,
might be doomed.
Like no one ever says that,
right? Well, you pointed out a couple of interesting things in the very article about the spread between wholesale and retail fuel and how margins are getting minimized for carriers right now. And that could be an industry-wide issue.
In the article, I talked about two things that David Parker, the CEO of Covenant, didn't necessarily bring up, but things that we thought were relevant. One of the first factor kind of applies to all truckload carriers in general. The second one applies more toward Covenant and CRST. The first one is just basically that fuel surcharges have become far less lucrative for carriers than they were in the past. Carriers buy fuel at wholesale prices. They're they're compensated for it at retail prices. When the difference is higher between those, they get this sort of unearned windfall.
It's all profit.
But that spread has collapsed, and that accounts for actually probably 6 cents a mile in just sheer profit. The second one, which has to do with Covenant's particular business model of having between 800 and 900 teams, and being able to charge a premium, for expedited freight, moving things, basically moving 2-day lengths of haul in one day. If you look at air cargo prices from Hong Kong to North America, they've kind of fallen off a cliff, and that's seasonal, but also they're kind of like the canary. Expedited freight is kind of like the canary in the coal mine for the freight economy. Right, so
it's a premium product, so it's going to be the first to rise or fall given macroeconomic conditions.
Yeah. So both because people tend to, we've noticed that household savings went up by a lot in December. People didn't go out and buy the flat screen TV or the new Xbox or the whatever the $12,000 new iPhone is. And so those kinds of things that get shipped in airplanes, weren't moving as urgently. Secondly, when capacity is loose in general, you don't have trouble moving your freight, and therefore
You move it the usual way, the cheap way.
Yeah, the usual way, the cheap way. You never get really in a jam where you have to rely on expedited. And so we feel like that
That's more particular to Covenant.
Yeah, Covenant and a few other carriers that have a lot of team drivers.
But we did see, and I took a look at this the next day, we saw a pretty broad sell-off across the truckload sector on Wall Street. I think a lot of people read between the lines, and even though maybe it was positioned, and maybe it was accurately positioned this way, I don't know their business as well as they do, as some one-time sort of
I think the street kind of saw through that.
Yeah, I think people formed their own judgments, and they said there is something bigger going on here. We're going to be in some people have called it a truck recession. That might be a little strong. I don't know. We'll see. But just to look at the drop in value of just about everybody who touches truckload,
right.
I'd say there's some people have an idea there might be something bigger going on.
A contraction.
Yeah. And a few days later, the Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell revised downward projections for gross domestic product growth in 2019 from 2.3% to 2.1%, which is obviously bad for everybody, freight included. Industrial activity tends to be still pretty weak. Interestingly, oil is doing fine. Who knows exactly why? It's
John Kingston would know the answer to that.
You can ask John Kingston about that.
Yeah, I can't wait to, on the radio on Saturday. We will deep dive. One of the most amazing things in talking to John about oil is the way that if you ask him a question about oil, he can connect it to absolutely any subject. Like, it's fascinating.
All right, see if you can get him to connect oil and blockchain. That's the challenge for this week.
Dude,
that's easy. That's easy.
Yeah,
that's super easy. It's sort of like, the 7 layers of Kevin Bacon.
5 degrees of separation.
5 degrees of separation. I don't think there's that many with John Kingston and oil. But it's fast. It really actually, it's like I never would have thought it's fascinating, but it really is. Like once he gets going. Well, speaking of global economy and earnings and stuff, why don't we talk about the Memphis-based giant FedEx for a minute?
And what's interesting about so they also issued downward guidance for their earnings,
and they did blame the global economy.
They did. They actually said the globe is slowing, which sounds probably more apocalyptic than it is. I think
it's still actually moving.
Get into your bomb shelters now. Stockpile Campbell's soup and ramen.
Right. The
end
atmosphere
is
is about
nigh.
to fly off the.
Right. I guess that wouldn't matter, the ramen, if you had no atmosphere. But.
Well, it is a pretty big deal. Their fiscal third quarter earnings were down. They've adjusted them downward from $6 billion annual net revenue to 4.5. Is that right?
Well, this is their projections for fiscal year 2019.
Gotcha.
About $6 billion to 4.5, so about 25% down.
And so, in a sense, the sky is falling.
FedEx Ground got hurt pretty bad because purchase transportation costs went up a lot faster than the actual yield on the freight they were moving did. It seems like the LTL business did okay.
It's the only one. That's the only segment of their business that apparently came out unscathed.
Yeah.
FedEx Freight.
Yeah, I would just go ahead. I would encourage everybody to check out Mark Solomon's article on FedEx earnings.
Yeah, he has a little bit of a different view, which is that maybe it's just FedEx's problem, and they are obfuscating, as people often do in earnings. And they're, if you want to believe that Covenant blamed one-time things when there may have been other things in play, well, maybe in this case he posits that FedEx blamed the world, when in fact it was a little virus. There's still some hangover from that, 300, 400 billion, whatever, among other things, because DHL, UPS, not seeing the same things that FedEx is seeing, according to his article.
And another thing that Fred Smith probably wouldn't like to admit is that their integration of Europe-based TNT Express, which is a freight forwarder and logistics provider,
has been tough.
Yeah, they just kind of screwed it up. It hasn't really. It's been a drag on the company. It hasn't really worked yet. They're trying to figure that out.
Yeah, he said the attack, this virus attack, Petya, I think is how you pronounce it.
Not Petya.
He said he would have bankrupted TNT Express if it were a standalone company at the time.
Wow.
So basically, it cost them more than the entire.
That was bad.
Yeah.
And may still continue to cost them through 2021, I believe, is the.
I remember last year, Maersk got hit really bad with a similar virus.
Right.
That cost them, I want to say, like $600 million. It was crazy.
And they had to rebuild everything.
All of their ships lost the ability to communicate with each other or with the shore, like for like days, and like they just could like, it basically paralyzed the entire company for the better part of a week. And these cyber attacks are becoming more and more serious, more and more disruptive, and more costly. It's kind of, I feel like 15 years ago when people were first like seeing like hackers click, I'm in. Like it was this kind of like
enhance
a Hollywood. Yeah, it was like a Hollywood like kind of just cliche. But now you're seeing like real damage being done to industries,
to the global economy. This is
slowing down the world.
FedEx is a major. People are going to look at this, and there's going to be a capital. You're going to see capital flee from transport stocks as a result between Covenant and FedEx, as a result of, in part because of this stupid virus. It wiped out $300 million, which is not that much in the big scheme of things, but
it's not that much to FedEx.
FedEx is a bellwether.
Well, it's the second straight disappointing quarter for FedEx. And so, of course, I guess the executives are preaching the long view, but Wall Street, of course, will have a very different take. We will see. Stay tuned as we bring to you the headlines each and every week. And without further ado, let's dive into Big Deal, Little Deal.
Oh, here we are.
What's the deal with you, JP?
Okie dokie.
Alan, it's been great to have you on.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us again.
It's always great to be on an award-winning podcast such as this one. I appreciate you guys.
Thanks for playing your part, man. All right, JP, are we ready? Ready or not, here we come. California Clean Tech Coalition endorses transforming trucking legislative package. Big deal or little deal?
It's a big deal. California is the principal driver of emission standards in the U.S., and we'll see what happens.
Orca AI is helping ships navigate safely in congested waters. Big deal or little deal?
I think it's a big deal. I think that there are more collisions than people are probably aware of, both in ports and in congested places like the Strait of Malacca. I think this is probably overdue.
Experts react on AAR's request for cost-benefit analysis and STB proceedings. Big deal or little deal?
Sounds like a little deal. I've described the Surface Transportation Board as a particularly anemic regulator of railroads, and I don't see much that's going to change that.
Ouch. Federal Reserve says no rate hikes. 2.1% GDP growth in 2019. Big deal or little deal?
It's a big deal. No rate hikes is good for growth, but they wouldn't be cutting the hikes if growth wasn't already really bad. Supreme Court declines to review California case with possible driver classification impact. Big deal or little deal?
I'm going to say little deal. The Supreme Court's decision not to hear the appeal doesn't set a new standard for determining whether an independent driver is an employee, and it becomes a state-to-state thing.
Too simple adds night vision to the mix. Big deal or little deal?
Big deal. The new tech sees better than the human eye, night and day, rain or shine, in the most challenging driving conditions. Hey, that's a big deal.
Court dismisses carrier lawsuit against Rhode Island truck tolling. Big deal or little deal?
I'm going to say little deal is dismissed on a technicality. The federal judge said it was essentially a state tax and therefore not in its jurisdiction. The ATA is considering what to do next.
Truck trailer orders down again in February, but analysts predict another record year. Big deal or little deal?
Little deal. There's a hefty backlog of trailers right now. It's the reason for the slowdown, but they expect a resilient market in spite of the economic slowdown. I can even say that slow and finish in
Boom,
time.
158.
Thank you, production manager Jonathan Smith.
No relation.
I was saying it. I was getting to it.
No relation to Ellis Smith.
Thank you, man. Great to have everybody on. Thanks again to Redwood Logistics. And I just want to thank my mom and dad and just,
This is like my producers.
I'd like to thank my wife.
Everyone who believed in me.
come a long way.
For this award. One day we'll remember the name of it.
Did you guys get to do an acceptance speech or anything, or was there a
I
ceremony?
think that was just.
We just did the acceptance.
Yep.
Okay.
Just patting ourselves on
Well,
the back.
congratulations again.
All right. Well, here is our inconclusive conclusion.
See you next week, guys.
As always, we go into more detail about each of the topics we've talked about today on our website, FreightWaves.com. We will continue to publish this podcast weekly, so be sure to subscribe to What the Truck on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. Also, make sure to leave us a review to let us know what you think of our new podcast. That'll do it for today. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next week on What the Truck.